I thought about, should I use some slides or not use some slides? And I do have some slides, but I've tried to keep them, hopefully, not too dry, you know, not too boring. And what I thought about for this evening, and I think it's been interesting, you know, Nee, I was saying a moment ago that I've worked now in all of the areas of, oh, wow, that was a big thunder. I've worked in all areas of renal now, so have done from all the way from early stages through to low clearance clinic, dialysis, transplant, post-transplant. And the more and more the evidence or sort of the research progresses, the more and more it's become really clear to us as dietitians, but also to your kidney doctors as well, that there's something really important that no matter what stage you're in terms of kidney disease, that we are really turning our heads away from some of the traditional dietary restrictions and much more interested in the positive things we can do with people's diet to enhance their health, and particularly to protect people against early cardiovascular disease. And when I talk about cardiovascular disease, I mean, you guys are very health literate, but thinking about the fact that kidney patients have a much higher risk of having a heart attack or a stroke earlier than someone else who's a similar age but doesn't have kidney disease. And the traditional way that we used to really concentrate on managing kidney disease and diet, it was all, and you know what, it's still changing. It's not quickly changing. There's a lot of, as you all know, this has this much phosphate, or this has this much potassium, or this has this much protein. And what you'll come to notice is that we're starting to move into a direction that is more about what can you do to protect your kidneys and heart, and particularly when you're in the later stages of kidney disease, it's more about protecting the heart. So I'm going to put some slides up, and we'll talk through things, and then I think if I try to make sure I just speak for 15-20 minutes max, so that there's plenty of time for questions. Does that sound okay, Nee? I think that's what you were saying you and Jill were saying on the email, so that there's plenty of time. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen, and what I'll do.
Okay, you share it, but I'm not in control of it, so I don't know.
No, that's okay. It'll still let me, I think. Okay. I'm going to share my entire screen. So very briefly, it's going to share back everyone's faces. Apologies. Okay. But then, so what I might do is just ask someone to tell me, are we now in, hold on, is that now in full screen mode?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I can't see anyone now, so just, you know, butt on in if you want to. So I want to really focus on this idea that what you can eat as opposed to what you can't eat, concentrating on what you can eat and the things that we know will offer you the most protection as a person living with chronic kidney disease, no matter what the stage. And as I say, our dietetic colleagues and our medical colleagues, we're all slowly but surely, our thinking around kidney diets is evolving, because the evidence is mounting for what we need to really be focused on. And this is what you're going to hear about this evening. And I suppose the way I thought of it is, what would I want to know? You know, if I were a person living with kidney disease, what would I want to know? So this bit here is probably your bread and butter as advocates for kidney disease patients. But just a reminder, because I think it is an important reminder, we know about 7 million people in the UK have chronic kidney disease. It's probably higher, but we know, a lot of you will know that some people haven't been diagnosed yet. So we know about 7 million people have CKD, and the later stages of CKD, so stage 3, 4, 5, including 5D for dialysis, that's about 3.25 million people. But of all of those people, stage 3, 4, 5, actually, as you can see, at any given time, there's only around or just over 30,000 people in the UK on dialysis, which is actually quite a small number if you think about the number of people with kidney disease, and then all the way down to the people who end up on dialysis. And also that there are about 3,000 or so transplants a year. So I think because you guys are all quite involved in advocating for your patients and your colleagues, your kidney colleagues, you'll know that the number of people getting transplants each year is growing, where there's lots of attempts to try to have more transplants done every year in every single unit in the UK. But at the same time, there's also a bigger demand on dialysis. So there are more people reaching end-stage kidney disease. So I mentioned that in my job that I do now, we spend a lot of time helping people who are in that purple 3.25 million. So we're looking at the people that live in North Central London, so in the Royal Free catchment, and trying to figure out how can we get these people, how can we help them for their kidney function to stay as good as possible, as long as possible, so that we can try to prevent so many people reaching dialysis. And there's some new medicines that are available that help us with that. But as we move down the line, as I said, we used to talk a lot about, be careful about this food because it has a certain amount of sulfate, or this food or that food. And actually what we're now moving towards, from the very beginning of kidney disease all the way through to later stages of CKD, and even after a transplant, we're very much focused on a very important message. And that is, if you look at my second line here, and I think this is easy for me to say as a kidney dietitian. I say, right, here's a fact that I think I would want to know if I were a patient living with kidney disease. And the fact is quite confronting. And some of you will be very familiar with this, and some of you will feel less familiar with this fact. And that is that if you are living with CKD, you have a higher risk of having a preventable and an earlier death, and it's usually related to, like I said, strokes and heart attacks. So if you compare someone who's living with kidney disease compared to someone who's living without kidney disease, around the same age and gender, and also if you compare people with similar ethnicities as well, so to white people, to South Asian people, to Black ethnicities, that actually the person with CKD has that higher risk. And something that we also, I think, is our responsibility as kidney experts, or kidney dietitians and kidney doctors, is not to shy away from that, to make sure that people living with kidney disease are aware of that, because sometimes it gets lost because we're so focused on what's happening with the kidneys. That the other thing is that having a transplant, although it absolutely improves life expectancy, improves quality of life, it doesn't necessarily change that risk of having an earlier heart attack or stroke. Because when you are living with CKD, as you know, you've lived with CKD for quite a long time before you've had the transplant. And so some of that risk has already been built up. And I think that I'm going to pause there for a second just to see if anyone has any questions about this, because I think that some consultants or kidney nurses are really open and transparent about the fact that if they're thinking about their patients living with kidney disease, they're really thinking about how can I help my patient reduce their chance of having an early, stroke or heart attack. I know that their risk is higher. What can I do? What advice can I give? What medicines, what lifestyle advice? What can I give to make sure that they know that, first of all, that your chance is higher, but also what kind of things that you can do to reduce that chance of having a heart attack or stroke. So I suppose I just was interested to know, I might quickly just stop sharing just for one moment, just because so I can see faces. That fact there, so that bit of information that says if you're living with CKD, the thing that we really have to be focusing on is reducing your chance of a heart attack or stroke, even if you've gone on to have a transplant, which of course is a very, very important, if you can have one, a very important treatment. Do you feel that does anyone want to comment on that? Is that something that everyone feels, yep, I knew that totally 100%, or actually I've never really thought about it in that way, or that's never been discussed with me? I'm interested to see if anyone has any thoughts about that information.
This is William here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, William. Thanks.
I just thought I'd comment after what you said.
Yeah.
I had CKD for many years, and I was lucky enough to get a transplant in 2019.
Yes.
And after 10 months or so, I had a small stroke, luckily relatively small, but that came as a surprise. It was a high blood pressure, but I had this stroke after having a transplant and not before.
Yes, and that speaks to, well, first of all, that's very frightening. I think having a stroke is extremely impactful on your life, even if it is small, and even if you don't have as many residual effects afterward. It's still a very shocking health event to happen, but it also reinforces that very fact, which is that even after having a transplant, it doesn't remove that risk that we know is there with CKD. And I think that as healthcare professionals, it's not that we conceal that information or that it's something that we've not wanted to share. I just think that the evidence has mounted now. So there's so many more big studies now. We have so many more people who've lived for longer with a transplant and live for longer with dialysis, that we can see those figures that even after you have a transplant, your risk isn't necessarily reduced of having a heart attack or a stroke, as you know, William, you can just attest to there. And I think that it's our responsibility to say, this is probably, if I were a kidney patient, this for me would be my main focus, would be, right, I know that my chance of having a heart attack or stroke is greater than my compatriot over here that's the same age as me, you know, but doesn't have kidney disease. And that would be the thing that I'd want to know how I can, you know, what I can impact. And I'm just having a look at a couple of the chat comments coming in. Sorry, 1 second. So yes, exactly. So someone has said, yep, didn't realize that was something, you know, didn't feel that was something that has been discussed to some extent. Someone else saying not being so aware of the risk as such. And then Funmi saying, actually, because you've had high blood pressure, you sort of felt maybe more aware of that risk because of the fact that we often talk about it with high blood pressure. But with CKD, your risk of having a heart attack or stroke, even if your blood pressure is good, is much higher. And that's why the way I framed these slides today and the advice I'm about to give you is very much focused on this. That is your most important risk to manage. And I want you to feel like you've got the information you need to help reduce that risk as much as possible. One thing I will say is some of this information will feel really obvious, and it's not going to be anything rocket science. The most interesting thing will be about how to balance some of the things you've been told already with some of the information and evidence that's coming out. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen again and go through my couple of bits of slides. So sorry, I'm just briefly coming back onto here. So there we go. So what do I want you to know? I want you to know how to reduce your chance of an early heart attack or stroke. And even when you have had a stroke, to reduce that chance of having that again. These 4 things that I'm going to put on the slide, you're not going to think, oh yeah, wow, Sinead, this is amazing. I never knew this. You're going to read that and go, yeah, this is obvious, I know all of this, but I want to then just touch on how we integrate this information with some of the stuff you know about having kidney disease and sort of a kidney diet. So number one, reducing salt. I think that this is going to be the thing that everyone knows in this room, back to front, in their sleep. But I do want to just talk about some of the specific information that's quite interesting about salt that we don't always get time to talk about in our appointments with you. The second thing is eating more fiber, and I'm going to be really precise about what I mean about that in a couple of slides. The third thing, this is a buzzword for everyone right now, but eating fewer or eating less of the ultra processed foods. And I've got a slide that will tell you exactly what I mean when I talk about that. And the last thing, eating less meat. So if I were to make a very basic, you know, as you notice, it's not me saying cut down on milk or eat only this many eggs a week or eat, you know, be careful about what type of high potassium veg. These are the things that I think anyone with kidney disease has the, you know, is really has, you know, should feel entitled to really understand. Reducing salt, more fiber, fewer ultra processed foods, and less meat. These are the things that are what we would call the game changers. You know, these are the things that in all the big studies, people who, at a population level, people with CKD who had less salt, more fiber, less meat, and fewer ultra processed foods, have that lower, what we call sort of that risk, the hazard risk ratio. So it drops every time that they put these interventions in place. And this is in spite of some of the other kidney rules that you might feel that you're very familiar with around fruit and veg and that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to just cover now is what would be the top things that I would say, this is what, you know, to remember. So I feel stupid really talking to you guys about salt because you guys can probably tell me as much about salt as I can to you. But this question came up recently in a GP seminar that we did, where the GP said they get lots and lots of questions about different types of salt. Salt is in anything and everything these days. And whether it be any of these salt types that you can see there, table black, Himalaya, Celtic, pink, rock, the ingredient within them is sodium, and sodium will impact blood pressure no matter which one of these is formed. I probably don't need to tell this group here that the low salt, the sort of salt alternatives have a lot of potassium, and we don't traditionally recommend those for kidney patients. But all of these salt types, no matter what type you use, they might taste a bit different, or you might feel like you can use a little bit less or more, but actually all of them have sodium. Now, what's interesting is in the general population, some people have blood pressure problems that will definitely improve if they reduce their salt intake. Some people have problems with their blood pressure that makes no difference how much salt they eat or not. There's other things going on with their hormones and other parts of their, you know, the physiology in the body. That means that even if they ate a really low amount of salt, they'd still have really high blood pressure. But in the blue box here, what you can see is that people with CKD, generally, at least 60% of people living with CKD have blood pressure that will directly lower when you eat less salt. And actually, the group that is most sensitive to reducing salt is people of Black ethnicities. So Black British backgrounds, or Black, it doesn't have to be Black British, but Black ethnicities are even more salt sensitive. But people with CKD, when they reduce salt, it gives a better result to their blood pressure than maybe someone else who has a different type of blood pressure problem that doesn't have CKD. And the other important thing to know is even once you get good blood pressure control, and some of you might have really good blood pressure control already, but even if your blood pressure is good, every little reduction in salt or sodium in your diet will still give more and more of a reduction, or more and more reduce your chance of a heart attack or stroke. And I think the reason I suppose I mention this is because in traditional medicine and conversations, we always say to people, you know, let's try and get your blood pressure down. We're going to give you this medicine and we'll reduce your salt. You know, let's try some things to reduce your salt. And actually, then it feels like you can stop once you've achieved a good blood pressure. But actually, people with CKD are very sensitive to salt intake. And actually, even once your blood pressure is good, you can still reduce your chance of heart attacks and strokes by continuing to reduce down your salt intake. And these things here, again, this is the section that I think is most, maybe least interesting to you guys, because I think you'll be really familiar with it. But I think that the things to emphasize, really the sources of salt in the diet are no different really to what they were 20 years ago. Things like salty sauces, salty snacks, processed meats, cheeses, they're all still really high in salt. And then there are cooking methods like salting water, Bengali patients, you know, people washing fish before cooking, using lots and lots of Maggi or stock cubes. Those things are things that are really, you know, we pass down when we're cooking. I learned how to cook and the amount of salt my mother put in, and you pass them down through the generations. And we've been talking to people about salternatives for a long time. So any of you who've seen one of us dietitians in clinic or your doctor will know all of this stuff. You know, you'll know that herbs, whether they're dried or fresh, garlic, ginger, spices, citrus, all of these kind of things, and even things like vinegars, these are all absolutely safe and appropriate to have in place of salt, or have a bit more so that you can reduce salt. And I mean, I'm probably talking to a really converted group of people anyway, in that, you know, when you're really actively involved in the KPA, you tend to be the ones that are at the forefront of this knowledge. But I think that, like I say, that important thing that I would say is, even after you've had a transplant, if you've had a transplant, or even if you're not yet on dialysis, or even if you're on dialysis, this idea of having a lower salt intake and achieving the lowest salt intake you can with your food still, you know, and really cutting down slowly so that you can give your taste buds a chance to adapt long beyond your blood pressure improving, you know, long after you're got to your dry weight. You know, you sort of see those things on dialysis, for example, like dry weight and blood pressure, and you think, right, that's what I'm trying to achieve. But even once that's achieved, achieving better reduction in salt will still give you a huge advantage. So that's something that we really encourage. The second point, you remember, we said eating less salt, eating more fiber. Now, this is the page that will probably make people go, hold on, Sinead, like this doesn't feel right compared to what we know about eating well with kidney disease. One of the most important things a person living with chronic kidney disease could do, I'm going to show you the evidence for this in a second, is eat more vegetables, more fruit, more whole grains, more legumes, chickpeas, kidney beans, all of those kind of things, nuts and seeds. That is going to feel like a really strange sentence to say, but whether you are pre-dialysis, you know, so chronic kidney disease in earlier stages, on dialysis, or having had a transplant, people living with CKD have such a small intake of vegetables and fruits compared to people of the same age. And it's no wonder why, because they get such strenuous messages about eating less fruit and veg for potassium control. And the result of that messaging over years, and this has been a big change. Now, I realize this is very much a study. This is a slide from a study. But I want to just talk to you about what it means to us that are outside of the research world. So this huge study looked at 8,000 patients in the red box there from all across Europe and South America. And for a few years, they found out information about how much fruit and veg they were eating, and did that impact people dying early of these cardiovascular disease deaths, these things that I talked to you about earlier. What they found from these 8,000 patients, and these were all hemodialysis patients, and this is the group where we typically say, oh, don't eat too many fruit and veg, you know, be careful, don't have this veg, don't have this fruit. Only 4% of all of these hemodialysis patients in this study ate 4 or more servings of fruit or veg a day. And some of you will remember that we recommend for all people, dialysis or not, we recommend 5 portions. So only 4% got 4 portions at least. The average amount of servings, and a serving's about a fist size, roughly. It does depend on the type of fruit and veg, but you can kind of think of it as a fist size. The average amount of portions in a week was only 8, which is just over 1 a day. And what they found, oops, sorry, I went too far, is that the higher the number of portions of vegetables and fruit that were eaten, the lower the risk of dying early from a heart attack and stroke. So the exact opposite to what we've been promoting to kidney patients for a long time, because as you know, if you've been on dialysis before, or if you've now on the other side, we worry a lot about high potassium because we know that that can be a danger immediately to the heart muscle. And the way that we have logically tried to help people to avoid high potassium is to reduce, or to be really careful about the types of fruit and veg that are eaten. And this seemingly logical approach, which absolutely will have stopped some sudden acute cardiac deaths, so it's not to say that's not been a good thing, but now that we have so much more information about the risk to people living with CKD, if I were entering dialysis right now, my goal would be to eat as much fruit and veg as I could and keep my potassium just within a safe limit. Because we know that the more fruit and veg people eat, even in a very high risk area like hemodialysis, the lower your chance of having those cardiovascular, so heart attacks and strokes, the lower your chance of having those early heart attacks and strokes. And this information is going to become very, very commonplace. So all over the world, so some of you will know Professor Wheeler. He's been involved in promoting all of this information as well, which is that now our messaging is very much transforming to, we want your potassium to be safe. I think most of you know here that that would be maybe below 6 if you're on dialysis, or maybe below 5.5 if you're not on dialysis. But we want to try to keep people eating their whole fruit and vegetables and trying to keep that to that 4 or 5 fistfuls a day to immediately lower your chance of heart attacks and strokes. And it's hugely impactful, very, very, very impactful. And then actually, rather than focusing on trying to lower fruit and veg intake, trying to reduce other sources of potassium, you can see some examples here. And these are just a very small list of examples, but things like don't reduce fruit, you know, cut out or reduce juice, coconut milk, evaporated milk, dried fruit, potato-based crisps, and ultra-processed foods, which is on the next slide. So I'm not managing the raw free dietetic team. I'm sort of alongside of it, working alongside the nurses a bit more, but we're going to be starting to change a lot of our advice to really support people to feel enabled to do this. Because there's something very interesting that happens when people increase their fruit and veg. Number one, they poo more. I don't know, that's a very frank way to say it, but we know that getting potassium out of the body via your kidneys doesn't happen so much as your kidneys get poorer and poorer, but your bowels can sort of work harder. And so if you keep your bowels really, you know, opening your bowels every single day, you can actually poo out a lot of potassium. And the other thing that I'm saying to any kidney patient now who is having potassium levels of 6 or above, straight away, say to your kidney dietitian or your doctor, could I be eligible for a potassium binder? It's called Localma. We use it at the hospital. Some of you might be on it. We'll take up when we do questions. I'll be interested to hear if anyone is. if I were a patient living with CKD, I would say to them, if I qualify for Lokelma, I want that straight away. You know, I want it now. And I want that so that I can eat fruit and veg to the maximum amount and keep my risk of heart attacks and strokes low. So Lokelma is a binder that doesn't work like a phosphate binder. You take it once a day. And actually for a lot of people who take Lokelma, they actually only tend to need it once every second day. It has minimal side effects. We have a very small number of people reporting nausea and vomiting, nothing like what we get with phosphate binders. And the whole point of this drug is to allow people to decrease their chance of having a heart attack and stroke in two ways. One, by allowing you to eat a lot more vegetables, particularly veg and fruit, but veg we know is particularly important for reducing your stroke and heart attack risk, but also by allowing people, so if you're on dialysis, this is less relevant to you, but people who are on ACE inhibitors and ARBs, you might know, and you might have experienced this in the past, that when your potassium rises, your GP or your kidney doctor might actually stop or pause your ACE inhibitor or your ARB. And those medicines are like ramipril, losartan, those kind of sartans and prils. Those medicines are extremely protective to the heart. And so if you have high potassium, then you have to stop those medicines. And then you're not getting those sort of protective medicines. And you also get put on a low potassium diet. And so you're not getting any of that good cardiovascular protection. So genuinely, and I'm not the type to generally push a medicine, but genuinely, if that were me, my mother, my father, myself, I would be saying, right, I'm having high potassiums regularly. I want to go on Lokelma because it will keep your potassium safe. And you could eat, I wouldn't go out and say, go and start drinking lots of juice because obviously it's sugary and all of that. But it does mean that your fruit and veg intake can be almost, if not completely normal. And you can almost forget that you have a kidney related restriction for fruit and veg. And so the advantage is you can absolutely lower your chance of having a heart attack or stroke with CKD significantly. And this is why I really want you to know about this. So when I'm focusing on potassium lowering with people living with kidney disease now, I would say to them, like in the last slide, I'd think about some of those really concentrated sources of potassium like juice and powdered milk and things like that. If I'm not someone who has a lot of that, I'd be going and saying, right, if you rely on a lot of processed foods, then I'd be saying, right, I'm going to try and have less processed foods, so more foods from the green, the yellow, and the orange. So we know that some foods have to be processed. You know, sometimes things have to be canned or, processed so that they don't go off. But we want to try and avoid the ultra-processed foods. And you can see the examples here like cookies and ice cream and ready meals and soft drinks and, some of those breaded meats and chicken and stuff like that. And looking out for these foods here in the label. This potassium here, if you see this on one of your food labels, this potassium here is 100% absorbed into your body. So if you eat foods like this, which are generally really, really processed foods, and it has a potassium additive like that on it, it gets really, really absorbed into your body and makes your potassium really high. Whereas if you eat foods from this green section, which are minimally processed, like fruit and veg, there's so much fiber in those foods that actually you don't absorb all of the potassium from them anyway. And this is again why our thinking around potassium needs to evolve. Us as professionals is evolving to reflect this big growth in the evidence that we have to show that these potassium additives make your potassium shoot up very quickly. Potassium in whole grains and nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables actually is not as easily absorbed, and we don't want you really don't want you to have to limit those foods. And then the last section that I wanted to cover is that thing around eating less meat. And this gets asked a lot now in clinics and whenever we do patient education sessions, because you'll all know this, that whether or not you're someone living with CKD, the idea of plant-based diets has exploded for people. And as a dietitian, it feels a little bit sometimes like it's a big fad, you know, so there's a lot of people who have become really almost to a religious level, you know, we cannot eat any meat, you're poisoning your body, plant-based is the only way to go, veganism is the only way to go. And I don't support that viewpoint. I think there's a huge advantage in vegetarian and sort of some vegan diets. But when you have chronic kidney disease, as you know, it can be quite difficult to get in the protein that you need, and also to get in the big range of vitamins and minerals. And sometimes some of those vitamins and minerals come from animal products. So our approach very much, and when I say our, this is sort of the specialist group of the British Dietetic Association, so the renal group, we are now, and we have been for the last few years, saying to people, if you're willing to swap some of your meat intake for more plant-based protein, even by a third, so let's say you eat red meat 5 times a week, maybe you have ham or something similar on sandwiches twice a week, and maybe you have a meal where you have, you know, any kind of meat, so chicken, and then another day beef mince, or, you know, whatever it might be. Even if you just reduce it by a third, you significantly reduce that chance again of having a heart attack or a stroke. So when I'm speaking with people, what we tend to do is we say, all right, in terms of all the meats you could eat, if you enjoy fish, let's keep the fish, because fish actually has protective benefits. Then we say, right, what kind of processed meat do you eat, if anything? And could we swap one of those occasions out in the week for one less portion of processed meat? And then we say, how much meat then overall do we eat with our meals, like between chicken, pork, beef, you know, all the different types of meat? And then once or twice a week, can we swap that out for, you know, so one example is if you're making a spaghetti bolognese, and you guys, a lot of you will be familiar with this concept, you say, right, instead of making this bolognese with all mince, I'm going to swap half of that mince out for black beans or lentils, red lentils or kidney beans, and doing that sort of gradual exchange. Some of you, I know from talking to people in clinics, are already doing this and embracing this quite strongly, and have said, I'm worried though, if I adopt a pattern where I eat more vegetable protein, like vegetable, you know, peas, kidney beans, chickpeas, split peas, or things like tofu or tempeh, will I end up malnourished because I don't get enough protein? And actually, as long as you still choose protein, and as you can see on the bottom line there, I've put in bold there, if you've lost weight, or if you're, especially if you're a dialysis patient where you need more protein, as long as you're still choosing to have protein every day, we don't have any evidence to show that swapping meat protein for vegetable protein makes you less well nourished. And in the earlier stages of CKD, all the way, in fact, all the way through, we show that, again, like with everything I'm saying to you today, that it significantly reduces your chance of heart attacks and strokes every time you swap one meat portion out for a sort of lentil, chickpea, you know, that kind of portion. The one thing I will say is that there's a lot of no meat type things, you know, like corn with the QUORN, and seitan. Like, there's a few brands and things that do like not chicken wings, and, you know, those kind of things. They're very ultra processed still. And the one thing I'll say about that is, if you're going to swap out a meat type for a plant protein, try not to swap it for a very processed plant protein, because actually that still is contributing to your ultra processed, you know, the foods that don't have as much fiber and have lots of protein. Oh, someone's on the tube, I can hear. Someone's arriving at Belsize Park. You might want to just mute yourself, I think, whoever that is. I just want to revisit. So as you've heard, I haven't talked anything about milk allowance, egg allowance, you know, nut allowance. any of those things. I focused on what I would want to know now with all of the evidence that we have very strongly progressing, which is if I have CKD, I have a much higher risk of a heart attack or stroke. And actually, the most important thing I can do for myself are the things that will lower that risk. And the whole kidney community is really starting to travel with that rhythm, which is how can we help enable our people living with kidney disease to choose more fiber through fruit, veg, whole grains, less meat through plant-based, fewer ultra-processed foods, by showing you the list of, like, and I'll share these slides with you, the list of ultra-processed additives, you know, let's avoid those, and less salt. And honestly, they're the things that will have the biggest impact on your life expectancy and your quality of life in terms of being able to live healthy life years with chronic kidney disease. And I've put a little reference to Kidney Care UK there because they have produced a huge amount of leaflets in the last couple of years, including some stuff on plant-based eating and eating for different, you know, so sort of giving tips about getting more fiber if you're following more of the traditional South Asian subcontinent diets versus, you know, African and Caribbean. So it's, you know, they're really trying to move with the times as well. So I just thought I'd remind you guys about them. I know you're probably really familiar with KCUK already, but it has come a long way in terms of what kind of advice it's sharing. And I just thought you might like to see what they're coming up with, because they've really modernized their approach. So I've stopped sharing. I've talked way too long. I'm so sorry. I've just looked at the time. Terrible. I'm looking in the chat. So yeah, fine. So I can send things. What I can do is I can just send all of the slides to, perhaps I can share them to Nee and Jill, and then if they don't mind, they can disseminate them for me to everyone who's joined the call. Does anyone want to ask any questions about what I've said?
Yes, I just want to say it's going to be on it's going to go up on the recording. It's going to go on the website.
Okay, perfect.
So Carol will need the.
Okay, yep, no problems.
Sorry.
No worries. Patricia.
Hi, thank you very much. And I've learned a lot tonight. However, and those my colleagues will know, you've not said anything about patients who do PD, because it's a totally different regime. In that, when you do PD, you have to be on laxatives every day. You don't really have that restriction that you have on hemo. And I just wondered if you'll do a part 2 dedicated to PD patients.
So when I talk about dialysis, I include any type of dialysis in that. So actually, the emphasis on lots and lots of fruit and veg. And actually, do you know, interestingly, Patricia, you know how, as you say, patients with PD are on laxatives because they want to keep the risk of getting constipated very low. Personally, I think, well, it'll be nice to avoid it, but actually there's some merit in the principle that sometimes hemodialysis patients could probably benefit from being on laxatives as well, because that advantage of keeping your bowels open very regularly, what it does is, and you probably know about this being a PD, is it really, really gets rid of a huge amount of uremic toxins. So the kidneys obviously have some role in reducing uremic toxins, but actually the bowels have a much under-recognized role in that. And if I were to say anything in addition to diet, I'd be saying to everyone, if you've ever had children before, and you know that when they're in the bathroom, you have like a little step so that they can get up onto the sink and reach there to brush their teeth or whatever. My children are now bigger. I've not gotten rid of that little step stool. I recommend that anyone with kidney disease, or really anyone, keeps one of those little step stools in their bathroom. And that's one of the other things that we know is hugely impactful, is that raising your knees when you do a number 2 gets the most positive evacuation of the bowels and makes a massive difference. That postural change makes a massive difference to opening up the bowels. and has sort of helped a lot of kidney patients, but any of the patients that I've worked with over the years, to empty their bowels a lot more effectively. And then that helps to both improve the gut microbiome, because it improves the removal of toxins, but also improves the removal of potassium. So the data that I showed that was about hemodialysis patients and the risk of cardiovascular disease, even though that was a hemodialysis study, all of this today is absolutely relevant to any single person, whether you've had a transplant, whether you're on hemo, PD, whether it's home hemo, in center, the advice would be exactly the same. These are your areas of focus because you all share that common increased chance. And that's the bit that I get frustrated that we don't tell people enough about. And I want people to feel like they know exactly what to do. Dee's asked a question in the chat, which is about cravings. And it's really, really difficult. So this is what we have, a lot of groups of people that, so there's a lot around the psychology of cravings, because whether you crave, so some people crave salty, some people crave sweet. One thing to say is that the craving for salty isn't driven specifically by your chronic kidney disease. And I say that to reassure you, because actually that craving that people have for salty or for sweet can happen. That sort of, there's a lot of factors related to that. Some of it is genetic related, some of it is about environmental cues and stimuli. And whether you crave salty or sweet is often irrespective of any conditions that you may or may not have. And so some people, and it really depends on the approach. So some people find that the way that they manage those cravings is by what we call a behavioral intervention, where, and this is probably getting into someone else's area of expertise more than it is mine, but a lot of psychology intervention. So if you look up sort of psychology management of cravings, they'll talk about different processes that they go through, where people will write down, you know, what the craving is, when they've experienced it, what else is happening in that moment. And you almost do a little process where you coach yourself to come up with a different way of managing the craving. And it's the same for the approach they use for smoking, the approach they use for any kind of cravings. When it comes to dietary though, some people do get a benefit by having a food that they would typically associate with salt, but without the salt. And so, for example, and I'm not saying it will work for everyone, but just as an example, is people often have cravings for salty food and they associate that with crunchy stuff, you know, like crisps or crunchy snacks, things that are typically salted. Now, there's some evidence to show that if you have those kind of cravings, and they're the kind of things that normally satisfy you, that actually if you have something crunchy, but that isn't salty, so something like an apple, let's say, that's crunchy, that's not going to do the same thing because it's too far away from the food that you're craving. But if people have something like like they choose nuts that are not salted instead of nuts that are salted, because they're eating a food that they normally associate with salt, as an example, but they're not having the salt, but they're having the same sensation. So it's crunchy, it's snacky, it feels like they're having that same snack. Some people, that's effective enough to help impact on their cravings. But I have to say there's a huge variety of response to that. So some people that works really well in, other people they need to tackle it more from a behavioral approach, which is you know, distraction and, you know, kind of thinking, identifying, why do I want it, what else could I do that might make me feel better, is it a cup of tea? You know, there's a lot of possibilities, but I think it can be quite interesting to have a look at the psychological interventions for cravings, because there's a lot of really useful information about how to work through those cravings. Are there any other questions that people wanted to put their hand up or pop into the chat?
Yes.
Hey, Carol.
Hello. Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk. And as Jill said, I'll put it up on our website. So the whole video will be up there on the website. Two points I wanted to make. One was you mentioned about lowering potassium. The one thing that I found with members of my family who've got heart disease as well as kidney disease is the biggest source of potassium for a lot of them is actually bottled water. Some bottled waters are so high in potassium, and it's not something people think it's a bottle of water. You know, I'll have it, I'll drink it. They don't actually look on the back to see, and there are very few of them that are low in potassium.
So if they are those mineral waters, they can be, but actually a lot of bottled water that has potassium in it, the milligram concentration is actually tiny. So it really depends on what. So if they're having, you know how nowadays it's really very, very popular to have those bottled waters where they have, I'm trying to think of some brand names, some examples of them, where they sort of promote that they've had things added back into them. So, you know, magnesium, calcium, potassium, those kind of things. But actually standard bottled water and the amount of potassium in those, it is minuscule. So I just want to give some reassurance that actually the amount in some of those bottles of water is tiny. It's the ones where they have the added minerals put back into, you know, put into them. They're the ones to watch out for. But standard bottled water, even though it might list potassium on there, it's a very, 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 very small concentration.
I mean, you can actually check because they actually tell you how much potassium is in it.
Yes, yeah.
Whatever it is. The other point I wanted to mention was that you mentioned the Kidney Care UK and their leaflets, but the NKF also does those leaflets.
Amazing, great.
The difference with the UK Kidney Care UK is that they actually do recipe books, and they do have quite a few for vegetarians and for people. So the recipe books are all totally free. If anybody wanted to get those.
And the Kidney Kitchen episodes on YouTube as well are really good.
Yeah.
So thanks, Carol, for reminding me about all of that. Yeah, they're brilliant. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, Jill.
Jill.
So
Hi,
just
Jill.
Yes, this is going to be a big question, so I won't go too long. But I'm on the cusp. You probably know I've had 2 consultations with the renal dietitians. I don't think you were one of them actually, but
no, I wasn't.
No, and because I've been told I'm sort of pre-diabetic, but I'm also very thin. I'm too thin. So so I do add cheese most days to my diet because I don't have any processed meats at all. No sausages or anything like that. But cheese I do like, and I don't have a huge amount, but I do have some because it's one of the proteins I have.
Yeah, gives a bit of calories. Absolutely.
Yeah, and calories. So but it's all very difficult, and really there isn't much help about how to all the things that they tell you not to eat but pre-diabetes are things like potatoes and pasta and
I know,
and rice.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because actually if I were counseling someone like yourself, I would take that approach of this is a person who is not overweight, in fact the opposite, and they definitely need to be modifying that information somewhat. And I do find sometimes people struggle to modify the information for individuals when they feel like it goes against the rules, you know, the rules of the diet, because actually it's not to your advantage to lose more weight if you're restricting your diet even more. So if actually one of your main sources if it was an important source of protein and you didn't have other high salt intake generally, I would say that it's absolutely fine to have cheese, even if it is a small amount each day, because it's in the context of the whole diet as well. And that's the other reality, is that everyone's whole diet is quite different.
I also know that you can have whole grain rice and you can have whole, you know, those sorts of things. So I try and stick to that. And potato is better mashed than not, but even so, I still have some potato.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think for calories, you would want, like you say, you'd want to be doing that.
But it's very difficult to get it down. I mean, I'm only just on the cusp.
Yeah.
You know, and I cut out lots of sweet stuff. I don't eat cakes. I occasionally have dessert. But the dietitian says, "Oh, don't worry too much about it." But it's all good to know when to worry and when not to.
I know, but I think with anyone, we really try to avoid people losing too much weight. I think that becomes a danger in itself. So it is true that it's very, very difficult. An absolute minefield, the whole nutrition.
I'm glad you said that because so I'll just carry on regardless. Well, not quite regardless. All right, thank you very much.
No problems, Jill. And I just see a question from Satish, just asking about banana and any fruits to avoid. Satish, I'm going to infuriate every kidney dietitian in the world by saying this, but actually I think we'll all be saying this soon. I wouldn't avoid, so apart from star fruit, which has got a component in it that can be toxic in high amounts, there is no fruit or veg that I would say as a kidney patient that you can never have again. And like I say, that's largely because we understand that fruit and veg is what we call a whole food. It has a lot of fiber in it. So not all of the potassium is absorbed anyway. And I would like people to be getting to the point where they can eat. And actually, a lot of the consultants, we're all talking about this. We're all sort of moving in this direction. I would much rather see all of our kidney patients who could tolerate it be on low CALMA and eat whatever fruit and veg they wanted and get that risk of heart attack and strokes down. So I will never, so if you see me, even any of my dietitians in the team, they might show you the list and say, banana is high in potassium, don't eat too much of it. And I'm never going to say to someone, go out and have a banana every day. But I would genuinely say to you, apart from star fruit, there is no fruit or veg that is absolutely off limits, because it just isn't, it doesn't work like that. And it's going to take a while for us to get out of that habit of putting those big lists out of what you can eat and what you can't eat, because actually we feel has done a real disservice to people. But it's been, all of the evidence has sort of supported restricting potassium, but actually we want to try and restrict potassium now without restricting whole fruit and veg. All right, are there any other hands?
Yeah. I think for me, just ask the question, and this will be the last question.
Yeah, no problems. Is this, are you writing, I don't know if this is something that
it's African and Caribbean.
African, right? And when you prepare soursop, what cooking method are you using?
We just eat it raw. We don't cook it.
Raw. Yeah, and what quantity would you have?
Like a whole fruit, yeah.
A whole fruit. And it's around the size of a mango, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So with mango, so this is another example, actually, very similar to what Satish has just asked. You know, can I eat it? Do I have to avoid it? Again, any fruit or veg, if you want to have it, you can have it. With soursop, because it's the same with mango, the trouble we get into is when people have, you know, like it's mango season, or, you know, something like that happens and it's something's in season, and then they end up having a really large quantity of it. So would you typically eat, so let's say, for example, you ate the whole fruit, that's going to give you a whole portion, really 1.5 portions of fruit. So then I would say have another small portion of fruit that day, and then focus on having vegetables rather than having too many portions extra of fruit that day. But I would definitely not say that you have to avoid that.
So it doesn't affect the kidneys?
So it's not toxic to the kidneys. It's still high potassium like all fruit and veg, but like I was saying to you, we're trying to move away from not having fruit and veg and actually trying to say, how can we have fruit and veg in a way that we can help you get your risk of heart attacks and strokes down. But if any of you have had potassiums over 6 and you want to just ask your dietitian or doctor and say, would I be someone who could benefit from trying low kelma? So that, because I really want to make sure that I can eat as much fiber and vegetables, as I can. I wouldn't hold back in asking your team, because I don't have all of your medical notes. Obviously, I won't know if there's something in someone's medical notes that means that actually wouldn't be the right medicine for them. But for most people who are having high potassiums and have had high potassiums over time, it's a safe and effective medicine and will allow you to have more fruit and veg, which will then lower that chance of heart attacks and strokes, which is what I really want for everyone.
Right.
Sorry for going on and on.
Right. Thank you very, very much for a very interesting talk. I believe we've all learned a lot from something we already know. But today you have taught us much more than what we know. And we thank you for it.
No problem.
Neil,
Thank you.
please, I want to ask about watermelon, because this summer, I was told before when I was dialyzing that watermelon is no good for us during the dialyzing. And then during this summer now, whenever I go to the shop and see it, I stop and looked at it and looked at it. Are we supposed to, I'm a transplant patient anyway, are we supposed to eat watermelon or not?
If you're a transplant patient, especially if your potassium is fine, no, it's not. So like I say, star fruit is the one. And also if you're on a statin, if you're on simvastatin, you have to be a bit careful of grapefruit. But apart from those 2 fruits, they're the only ones that there's absolute contradiction. Like you cannot have those fruits as a kidney patient because there is a risk that so if you're on a simvastatin, then you have to avoid grapefruit. And if you're a kidney patient, avoid star fruit. But other than that, as long as you don't go out for me and eat half a watermelon, a huge amount. Oh no, that was Veronica who asked that question, wasn't it? Sorry. So as long as you don't go out and eat a huge amount, absolutely, there is nothing that says, there's no danger in watermelon in itself. It's not contraindicated for people living with kidney disease at all.
When I go to Marks and Spencer, I mean, there's a container contains, they spoke about mango, and then it will have mango, watermelon, and other fruits. I think about 4 or 5 of them in a day.
Yeah.
I would just pick it up and then looked at mangoes, which I have been told we shouldn't be eating. And then I looked at watermelon, and then there was a kiwi.
Kiwi?
Yeah, that one
Kiwi.
as well.
Yeah.
I would just put it down because this kidney getting it wasn't easy for me.
No. So if you're passing plenty of urine, especially, which a lot of people are with a transplant, they're really, I wouldn't be, like I say, I wouldn't go out and have 5 kiwis in a day, but you should definitely be going to try to get 2 fist-sized portions of fruit every day, and then 3 or 4 fist-sized portions of vegetables every day. You can, and if mango is part of that, if watermelon is part of that, if apple is part of that, if grapes is part of that, no matter what you choose, I would be aiming. You remember that part of the poster where we showed that it's all about the portions.
Moderation.
So yes, if you go out and have, a whole watermelon, that's way more portions, and there's a risk there that we raise your potassium. But if you're eating sensible amounts, 2 portions of fruit every day and 3 or 4 portions of veg, that is absolutely what we want you to be having to keep yourself healthy.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very, very much.
No worries, Sinéad. No worries, everyone.
What I want to know,
Thank you,
before you go is coconut oil,
milk.
Milk is not good for us, but the coconut itself is good for us.
Yeah, so coconut milk and coconut cream, it's just because, it's not even that it's not good, it's just because it's a really, really concentrated source of the potassium. So what it means is that it's very, very absorbable. So when it's been processed like that into that coconut milk or coconut cream, that potassium is very, very easily absorbed into the bloodstream. And so that's why we're careful about people having that. Whereas if you have a little bit of fresh coconut, again, it's got all the fiber with it. It doesn't all get absorbed. Again, you're not going to go out and eat 5 coconuts, but having fresh coconut on its own, it's not completely contraindicated. And as I say, I think it's about the quantity. It's about making sure that whatever variety that you have, that you're sort of aiming for those portions so that it doesn't go excessive, but you also have enough fruit and veg that you keep that chance of heart attacks and strokes down.
Yeah. So thank you very much. So
no problem.
To all who were here today, or who are here today, we have now learned a new magic drug. We can ask our consultants to help us eat more fruits. Okay.
But yeah, some of your consultants are really on it already, and some of them will be a bit more nervous.
Yeah.
But yeah, get them. Yeah, talk to them at least about whether you're appropriate for low CALMA.
Right. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And thanks to all the patients who attended this meeting. You've made it worthwhile for myself, for the association, and also for Sinéad.
Yes,
Thank you.
you very much.
Yeah, thanks
Yes,
for giving
thank
up your time, guys. I appreciate it.
you.